I have never, to the best of my knowledge, been accused of anything resembling sentimentality in my work. With good reason. To my mind, there is no greater act of authorial mawkishness than embellishment. Brevity is the soul of a ghost story. With that in mind, I think it is high time that we move on to mine. There was a man dwelt by a churchyard. It had once belonged to the parish priest, but the priest was a married man who wanted more room. Besides, his wife did not like to be able to see the churchyard at night from her bedroom window. She said that she saw, well, never mind what she said. Anyway, she gave her husband no peace until he agreed to move to a house in the village street. And the old one was taken by John Poole, who was a widower and lived there alone. He was an elderly gentleman, kept very much to himself, and people said he was somewhat of a miser. It was probably true. Certainly he was morbid in other ways. In those days, it was common to bury people at night by torchlight, and it was noticed that whenever there was a funeral toward, John Poole was always at his window. There came a night when there was an old woman to be buried. She was fairly well-to-do, but she was not liked in the place. The usual thing was said of her. She was no Christian. On those nights such as Midsummer's Eve and All Hallows, she was not to be found in her house. She was red-eyed and dreadful to look upon, and no beggar ever knocked at her door. There was no storm on the night that she was buried. It was fair and calm. She was buried in woolen with no coffin. Nobody was there but for those who were actually needed, and John Poole watching from his window. Just before the grave was filled in, the parson stooped down and cast something that clinked onto the body. And in a low voice he said, "Thy money perish with thee." Then he walked quickly away, leaving the sexton to fill in the earth. He made a very neat job of it. Next day, which was a Sunday, the churchgoers were rather sharp with the sexton, saying that it was the untidiest grave in the yard. Indeed, when he came to look at it himself, he thought it was rather worse than he left it. Meanwhile, John Poole went about with a curious air, half exulting, as it were, and half nervous. More than once, he spent an evening at the inn, which was contrary to his usual habit. And to those who fell in to talk with him, he hinted that he had come into a little bit of money and was on the lookout for a somewhat better house. "Well, I don't wonder," said the smith. "I wouldn't care for that place of yours. Why should we fancying things all night?" The landlord asked him, "What sort of things?" "Well, maybe somebody climbing up the casement window, or the like of that," said the smith. I don't know, old Mother Wilkins, what was buried a week ago today. Come, I think you might consider of a person's feelings, said the woman. It isn't so pleasant for Master Poole now, is it? Master Poole don't mind, said the smith. He's been there long enough to know. Besides, I only says it wouldn't be my choice. But with the passing bell and the torches when there's a burial and all them graves lying so quiet when there's no one about. Only they says there's lights. Don't you never see no lights, Master Poole? No, I don't never see no lights, said Master Poole sulkily, and called for another drink and went home late. That night, as he lay in his bed upstairs, a moaning wind began to play about the house, and he could not sleep. He got up and crossed the room to a little cupboard in the wall and took out of it something that clinked and put it in the breast of his bedgown. Then he went to the window and looked out into the churchyard. Something was sticking up out of the ground in a part of the churchyard that John Poole knew very well. He darted back into his bed and lay there as still as he could. Presently, something made a very faint rattling at the casement. With a dreadful reluctance, John Poole turned his eyes that way. Between him and the moonlight was the dark outline. Then there was a figure in the room. Dry earth rattled on the floor, and a low, cracked voice said, "Where is it?" Steps went hither and thither, faltering steps, as of one walking with difficulty. It could be seen, now and again, peering into the corners of the room, stooping to look under chairs. Finally, it could be heard fumbling at the doors of the cupboard in the wall, throwing them open. There was a scratching of long nails on empty shelves. The figure whipped around, stood for a moment at the side of the bed, raised its arms, and with a hoarse scream cried, "You've